the armed forces of Ukraine have completed the formation of their first separate medical battalion. It has already started its work on the front lines. This was reported by the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Alexander Syrsky. He emphasized that the main task of the unit is to save as many soldiers' lives as possible, especially those of the infantry. The battalion will carry out medical evacuations, including the use of ground-based unmanned systems and the provision of emergency care.
During this time, a successful recruitment campaign was conducted. Almost the entire personnel of the battalion are professional volunteer doctors. Right now, the new recruits are undergoing a mandatory basic training course, while the battalion is going through a phase of coordination and preparation for combat deployments. Taking into account the realities of modern warfare, the battalion has formed a separate company of unmanned systems for the drone evacuation of wounded soldiers using ground platforms. Alexander Syrsky, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, on Telegram.
Meanwhile, in the Lyman direction, since the beginning of the day, Russian occupiers have made several attempts to push the Ukrainian armed forces from their positions near Kolodyazy, Torsky, and Zelina Dolina. In the Pokrovsk direction, the Russian army attacked near the settlements of Malinivka, Myrna, Myrolobivka, Udakny, and Serhivka. In the Novopavlivka direction, the aggressor attacked near Vasil, Shevchenko, Volnpol, and Konar. The defense forces are holding back the enemy's onslaught. Units of the 3rd Assault Brigade carried out successful raid and strike operations in the area of the settlement of Redkadub on the border of Kharkiv and Donetsk regions. As a result of the offensive actions, a platoon of the 283rd Motorized Rifle Regiment of the 144th Division of the 20th Russian Army was eliminated. The brigade's fighters cleared the positions and secured them. Thanks to the efforts of the Ukrainian defenders, the tactical position of the defense forces in this direction was improved. And in the Pokrovsk sector, fighters from the 144th Center of Special Operations Forces, together with operators of reconnaissance UAVs, FPV drones, drop drones, and mortar and grenade launcher crews, eliminated a Russian assault group. The operation began with an FPV drone strike on a locomotive where the invaders were hiding. As a result of the explosion, a fire broke out in the locomotive. 6 Russian occupiers tried to escape. 5 of them were eliminated. One of the wounded pretended to be dead, but was discovered by drone crews, evacuated, and after receiving medical assistance will be added to the exchange fund. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian Navy destroyed a boat carrying Russian troops in the Kherson region. A vessel from Russia's Black Sea Fleet was attempting to land a group of Russian occupiers on the Tendrov Spit. However, Ukrainian defenders detected it in time and destroyed it along with the landing party. Nearly 7,500 Russian occupiers were neutralized by Ukrainian defenders on the front lines just over the past week. These figures were published by the Commander-in-Chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Alexander Syrsky. He emphasized that one of the key tasks is to eliminate enemy infantry even as they approach Ukrainian positions.
Well, the more the enemy throws in personnel or equipment, it means the more of that personnel gets killed, and the same goes for the equipment. It's always proportional. So, for us, it's consistently every day, on average, about 1,000 to 1,100 occupiers killed or wounded. For the whole day, that number was 1,200. In this figure, it practically doesn't change. On special days, when there are assaults, the number sometimes reached up to 1,500.
And in the past day, Ukrainian soldiers eliminated 1,200 Russian occupiers. The total losses of the Russian army since the start of the full-scale military invasion have exceeded 1,013,500 people. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, 7 enemy armored vehicles and 21 artillery systems were also destroyed the day before. In addition, 198 drones were shot down and 100 units of automotive and special equipment were hit.
We're joined by Pavlo Lekichuk, Head of Military Programs at the Center for Global Studies, Strategy 21. Hello, we're glad to have you on Freedom.
Good evening. Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes.
As usual, I'd like to start with the situation at the front. We've just read the summary from the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, as we usually do, and we'd also like to hear your analysis. Which direction remains the hottest? Where are the armed forces of Ukraine most successful in holding back the enemy? What's the situation, and in which directions? Please, the floor is yours.
The strategic offensive by the Russians in the east of our country continues. This is a wide front stretching from Lyman in the north all the way to Novopavlivka. Well, basically to the southern front, to the junction with the southern front in the south. And everywhere here it's hot. The Pokrovsk direction, I would now put Novopavlovsk in second place because the enemy there is close to breaking through our defenses. So, and pushing our forces back a significant distance. When WE talked a lot, our journalists, the media talked about the Russians' attempts to break through to Dnipropetrovsk region in the context of Pokrovsk. In reality, their main goal there is to cut off. The main task of the Russians is to cut the Pokrovsk-Pavlorad highway. That's why Dnipropetrovsk region comes up. So in the Novopavlivka direction, they're already getting close to the borders of Dnipropetrovsk region. And what their plans will be as they advance, I can't predict, and it's unlikely that any analyst could say for sure. In the Pokrovsk direction, in the Toretsk direction, in the Chasiv Yar direction, these are the main areas of fighting, and the key events are happening around Pokrovsk. Overall, this direction will determine the further course of hostilities in the medium-term perspective. So, we just read out the General Staff's report stating that Russian losses amounted to 1,200 people over the course of the day. And that's a good figure, but it's not enough. The thing is, the number of resources and reserves that Russia can throw into the war in Ukraine actually depends on how well their mobilization machine works. If its capacity, its throughput, exceeds the daily losses of the enemy, then resources will accumulate and they'll have something to throw again and again at the Ukrainian front, at the war in Ukraine. If this ratio flips the other way around, if the losses start to exceed the capabilities of Russia's mobilization machine, then, well, Putin simply won't have. He'll have insufficient resources to continue a large-scale offensive.
Pavel, look, I'd like you to try with us. Well, not so much to figure out, because we understand that this is a very difficult and pressing issue that is now facing the Ukrainian leadership, the armed forces of Ukraine, and, in general, the entire defense forces of our country, right? These are the increasingly frequent drone attacks, yes, and different tactics. Basically, yes, with various types of these means that the Russian Federation is using to try to strike different targets. Well, what kind of targets? These are residential buildings.
Trains on the Dnipro in a Dnipropetrovsk region.
These are trains in Dnipropetrovsk.
Tweet on train.
Yes, specifically in Dnipro, or rather, yes, in the Dnipropetrovsk region. So, we already know that June 25th has been declared, and will be declared, a day of mourning in the city of Dnipro, as a result of yet another barbaric attack by, essentially, the terrorist army of the Russian Federation. These are missiles, these are drones. Pavel, what should we be thinking about first and foremost in order to actually prevent these attacks somehow, or at least respond to these launches as they happen? Yes, right now I'm not talking about the civilian aspect. Yes, we all understand. These are shelters, or at the very least, the basic rule of two walls, so that people at least try, well, not exactly to ensure safety, but to minimize the risks for themselves and their families. Yes, we constantly talk about this and emphasize that this is what you should do if you don't have the opportunity to get to places that are safer. But still, if we're talking about anti-drone and anti-missile measures, Pavlo, what should we be thinking about first and foremost? What should we focus our attention on?
Well, the main focus should be on the Shahids. Putin is saying that they're launching the Orshnik mass production. But that needs to be taken into account, though it's not the main problem right now. Colleagues from Defense Express did a quick analysis and concluded that right now the Shahids are not only, in terms of the number of engines flying into Ukraine every day, surpassing all other means of attack combined, but also in terms of the amount of explosives being delivered. And if the effectiveness of our air defense systems against enemy cruise missiles or ballistic missiles is like 0.9 or 0.8, so out of 10 missiles, maybe one gets through, right? But if 400 Shahids are launched and the destruction rate is 80%, that still means about 50 of these enemy terrifying machines of death will reach their targets. That's the main problem here. And, well, of course, both the improvement and expansion of the range of warheads for them, and the upgrading of the electronics on these Shahids, and the improvement, well, not even just improvement, but a broader range of tactical methods for their use. All of this makes the threat more and more dangerous, terrifying, and significant. But here, too, the first thing is to strengthen our air defense. There are two components. The first, the traditional one, which I keep insisting on, is mobile fire teams. There's a lot of talk now about drone interceptors. According to statistics on destroyed enemy targets, especially Shahids, 50% are destroyed by mobile fire teams. DFTG, TRO of the ground forces, the Navy, and the Air Force. They account for 50%. Another 25% are lost due to radar detection. It's hard to say here which of them are decoys and which were brought down by our electronic warfare systems. But still, the number is impressive. And next come the Army aviation, then the Air Force aviation, anti-aircraft missile systems, and so on, and including fighter drones. That's why we need to keep relying on mobile groups. And on the contrary, we shouldn't abandon this approach, but rather strengthen it. Give the guys the best possible equipment, radar, optics, direction-finding gear, and in the end, machine guns, so that no one else has the upper hand. So, well, that's the first point. Second, of course, this is a long-term game. It's about developing more advanced means to destroy these enemy drones. That includes drone fighters, which are being talked about a lot right now by both politicians and the military. But it's important to understand that this is a medium and long-term prospect. And there should be more of these drone fighter systems. Not just the drones themselves, but the entire complexes, which include radar stations and crews operating these drone fighters. Then there are Shahids attacking us every night. Only then will it be effective. And third, not everyone agrees with me, but nevertheless, I stand by my opinion that preemptive strikes on production sites, on launch locations. We know these sites. These are Ochak, Primorsko-Akhtarsk, and KRYMSK in the south. The launch sites in Kursk and Bryansk regions are also known. Those are the places that also need to be struck. Our armed forces of Ukraine are striking those places, but obviously, that's not enough. Production. Critics say that this kind of production can't be put out of action for long. Maybe I agree, but if there are regular hits on the factories producing not only the Shahids themselves, missiles, shells, but also the components for them, then this whole chain just breaks down. On the oil industry, Russian experts themselves have said that each individual strike isn't critical for Russia, but the system creates a breakdown of this mechanism.
Pavel, I'd like to talk in more detail about the topic of air defense. The Ukrainian armed forces will soon receive new air defense systems that will help repel attacks from Russian drones and missiles. This was reported by the head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, Andriy Yermak, on Telegram. He announced positive news about strengthening air defense and interceptor drones. Earlier, Defense Minister Rustem Umerov also named air defense as one of the strategic priorities. And just recently, a Norwegian company, which, as you already mentioned, produces NASAMS air defense systems, opened an office in Ukraine. Today, a NATO summit is also taking place in the Netherlands. We've already heard some statements from Ukraine's partners. Additional arms deliveries to Ukraine are also expected, in particular, specifically regarding air defense. In your opinion, after the NATO summit, how much can the situation improve? What might be transferred to us? What might we receive? Or is it more about funding, which we would use to expand our own production? Please, the floor is yours.
You've pretty much listed all the possible components. Possible, but that doesn't mean they will definitely and fully be delivered. Honestly, damn, the NATO summit that's starting in The Hague is very critical for the alliance right now. They're facing the survival of the North Atlantic Alliance itself, not ways to develop it. And that's why even just looking at the schedule, the agenda, the events planned for the summit, and how many of them won't actually take place. Well, for example, every NATO summit on the second day was accompanied by a Ukraine-NATO Council. There will be no meeting of the Ukraine-NATO Council at the level of heads of state. That's a bad sign. But nevertheless, the fact that our president, even with such difficult prospects for NATO and a brief discussion, visited the Netherlands and will be meeting with the leaders of countries, our partners, who are primarily providing us with help and support, shows that this is the right move. Such an opportunity couldn't be missed. And it's obvious that Volodymyr Zelensky and his team won't be coming empty-handed. Right now, the Alliance has a new strategy, a correct one, not to disclose the nature and amount of aid being provided to Ukraine by partner countries, thereby not giving Russian intelligence any extra information. And that's the right approach. But obviously, the aid will continue and will primarily be expressed in the types of weaponry. This includes air defense systems, maintenance, and aviation, which is one of the most critical issues, ammunition from the European Union and from our partners individually. And it's not just about setting up and financing the production of military equipment and weaponry in Ukraine, but also about joint production. And that's a big plus, because first of all, in the short term, it's about repairs, maintenance, and upgrading the equipment we already have. It's one thing to send it, roughly speaking, to Germany or France for repairs. How many months would that take? Or to carry out those repairs, maintenance, and upgrades directly at Ukrainian facilities. This isn't just an economic factor, but a crucial military one. And the second point is the military-industrial complex. Our experience, our engineering developments, and the technologies we can get from our partners. Well, more precisely, the ones we can exchange with our partners should create a synergistic effect. This is predictable, and it's very important.
Pavel, thank you very much for the conversation and for joining our broadcast. You are always welcome here. Pavel Lekichuk, head of military programs at the Center for Global Studies and Strategy of the 21st Century, was with us live.